There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a royal estate when something irreversible has just happened. It is not the silence of peace or rest. It is the silence of held breath, of servants pretending not to have heard what they just heard, of curtains that stay perfectly still even though every person standing behind them is trembling. That was the silence that fell over Ashford Manor on the morning of the 3rd Tuesday of October, when Princess Alara of the House of Caldenmore walked down the grand staircase, placed a sealed letter on the silver tray in the entrance hall, and told the head butler in a voice so calm it was almost frightening that the Duchess of Renholt was no longer welcome on these grounds. Not for the harvest gala, not for the winter reception, not for any occasion, formal or private, for as long as Alara drew breath as the senior royal of this house. The butler, a man of 31 years of service who believed he had seen everything there was to see inside these walls, said nothing. He simply took the letter, placed both hands on the tray, and nodded once. That was how it began. But to understand why it ended the way it did, you have to go back further. You have to understand what kind of woman Princess Alara was, what kind of woman Duchess Maren had always been, and why the two of them had never, in 30 years of shared royal obligation, managed to exist in the same room without the temperature dropping by several degrees. Princess Alara was the older sister of King Aldric, the reigning monarch of Caldenmore. She had served the crown her entire adult life, not from behind a podium or at lavish banquets, but in the actual machinery of royal duty. She had represented the kingdom at foreign summits when her brother was too ill to travel. She had managed 3 separate diplomatic crises involving the Northern Territories, all of which had been resolved quietly and without public embarrassment. She was not beloved by the press in the way that younger royals were. She did not smile easily or pose for photographs with children, but she was deeply respected by everyone who had ever sat across a table from her. She was the kind of person who arrived at a meeting having already read every document, already anticipated every counter-argument, and already decided what outcome she was going to walk away with. She had also, for her entire life, placed the reputation and stability of the House of Caldenmore above everything else, above her own comfort, above personal friendship, above what she privately wanted. And it was precisely this devotion to the crown that made what happened with Maren so explosive, because what Maren had done had not simply hurt Alara personally. It had threatened the institution that Alara had spent her life protecting. Duchess Maren of Renholt had entered the royal family through her marriage to Prince Caspian, King Aldric's younger brother, some 11 years ago. She was elegant in the way that women who have studied elegance very carefully can be precise in her mannerisms, deliberate in her speech, always perfectly dressed. She had learned the protocols quickly and had navigated her early years as a royal in-law with what most people considered admirable composure. She attended the required functions. She gave the required interviews. She said the required things about duty and family and service to the kingdom. But Alara had watched her from the very beginning with the quiet attention of someone who already knew what she was looking at, not because she disliked Maren instinctively. Alara was not a woman who made decisions on instinct. She had observed her carefully and over time and drawn conclusions based on evidence alone. The evidence was this: Maren wanted power, and she wanted it on her own terms, and she was willing to do things to get it that Alara found deeply troubling. It started with small things. Conversations that Maren angled toward her own interests. Relationships she cultivated with the press, not through official channels, but through quiet lunches and informal arrangements that gave certain journalists access in exchange for favorable coverage. There were decisions made at the Renholt estate that affected the surrounding communities, decisions about land, about staffing, about local traditions, that were made without consultation, and that benefited Maren's household at the expense of people who had no voice in the matter. Each thing on its own was deniable. Each thing could be explained away, but Alara did not look at things one at a time. She looked at the pattern. And the pattern told her that Maren was building something, piece by piece, and that the thing she was building would eventually come at a cost to everyone around her. For years, Alara held this knowledge privately and did nothing dramatic with it, because that was not how she operated. She did not make accusations she could not support. She did not engage in the kind of family drama that ended up in newspapers and embarrassed the crown. She maintained a civil distance from Maren, attended the same functions, said the correct things, and watched. What changed everything happened in the spring of that year. at the Northern Territories Council gathering hosted at Ashford Manor. It was a significant event, 3 days of meetings between the Crown's representatives and the territorial governors, covering land agreements that had been under negotiation for the better part of a decade. Alara had been the lead negotiator on the Crown's side for 2 years. She knew every detail of every document. She knew where the sticking points were, what each governor needed to feel satisfied, and how to bring all of it to a conclusion that was good for Caldenmore. On the second evening of the gathering, Duchess Marin hosted what was described on the schedule as an informal dinner for the governors and their senior staff. Alara had not been informed that the format of the evening had changed. She had not been informed that Marin had spoken privately with 2 of the territorial governors before dinner was served. She had not been informed that Marin had made certain suggestions, vague but pointed, about the direction the negotiations might take, suggestions that were directly at odds with the position the Crown had spent 2 years building toward. Alara found out about it the next morning when one of the governors, a careful man named Aldous, came to her before the morning session and told her with visible discomfort that he was now uncertain about his position on the Western Land Agreement. He said he had received information the previous evening that had changed how he saw the situation. He did not name Marin. He did not need to. Alara spent 4 hours in meetings that morning holding the negotiation together by sheer force of preparation and composure, while internally reckoning with the fact that someone inside her own house had deliberately worked to undermine what she was building. She did not let it show. She asked the right questions. She gave the right answers. She kept the session from collapsing. When Governor Aldous left the meeting room at noon, the position he had been uncertain about was restored, and the entire agreement was back on solid ground. No one in that room, apart from Alara, knew what that morning had cost her. She did not confront Marin that day. She finished the summit. She thanked the governors. She saw them off. She returned every document to its proper place. And then she went back into Ashford Manor, sat alone in her study for 2 hours with the door closed, and decided exactly what she was going to do. The letter she wrote was private, not a formal royal decree, not a public statement, not anything that would appear in the household records in a way that could become a scandal. It was a letter from Alara to Marin, written by hand, that laid out in measured and precise language what Alara knew, what she could demonstrate, and what the consequences were going to be going forward. The consequences were simple. Marin was no longer welcome at Ashford Manor under any circumstances. Alara was also communicating her position to King Aldrich, and if Marin wished to dispute any of what the letter contained, she was welcome to do so through the proper channels, in front of the people who would need to examine the evidence. She sealed it herself. She placed it on the silver tray in the entrance hall the following morning. She told the butler what she needed to tell him, and then she went to breakfast. Marin's response came 3 days later. It was delivered through her private secretary, and it contained language that suggested Alara had misunderstood the events of the summit, that Marin's conversations with the governors had been entirely social, that she had no interest in or knowledge of the negotiating position, and that she found it deeply hurtful to be accused of something so serious by a member of her own family. Alara read the response once. She placed it in the correct file. She did not change her position by a single word. What happened next unfolded slowly, as things inside royal families tend to when they are serious enough to matter. There were conversations between Alara and King Aldrich that were not recorded. There were senior advisors who were consulted. There was a quiet and thorough examination of what had actually occurred at the summit dinner, who had spoken to whom, what had been said, and in what context. What emerged from that examination was not a formal finding. It was never going to be announced publicly because the Crown does not operate that way. But it was enough. Marin did not attend the harvest gala at Ashford Manor that year. She did not attend the winter reception. An invitation that had previously been extended to her for the spring convening of the Territorial Council was quietly not renewed. None of this was explained publicly. It simply happened. And because royal households operate on a combination of protocol and precedent, the absence was noted by everyone who needed to note it, and quietly passed over by everyone else. There were people in the wider circle of the court who speculated. There are always people who speculate. Some of them assumed it was a personal falling out, the kind of thing that happens in any large family under pressure. Some assumed it had something to do with the Renholt estate's ongoing financial arrangements, which had been the subject of quiet concern in certain quarters for some time. A few, those who paid very close attention to the movement of people through official functions, began to notice that the pattern of Marin's appearances at Crown events was quietly but consistently contracting, and they drew their own conclusions. None of them knew about the letter. None of them knew about the morning after the summit when Governor Aldous had come to Alara with doubt in his eyes. None of them knew what had been said in 2 hours behind a closed study door. The machinery of royal discretion operated the way it always has, by making the important things invisible to everyone who didn't absolutely need to see them. The staff at Ashford Manor knew in the way that staff always know, not the details, not the letter's exact contents. But they had seen Alara come down that staircase on a Tuesday morning with a quality of finality about her that they had not seen before, and they had understood what it meant. They had spent 30 years watching her carry everything without complaint, absorb every difficulty without drama, hold the house together through transitions and tensions, and the ordinary cruelties that accumulate inside powerful families over time. They had seen her give and give and give. And so when they saw her draw a line, there was not a single person in that house who was surprised. There was, instead, a quiet and collective sense that something correct had occurred. The months that followed were not easy. Marin, through intermediaries, made several attempts to have the situation reconsidered. There were messages passed through mutual connections. There was a dinner attended by several members of the extended royal circle at which certain conversations were intended to happen that would have put pressure on Alara to soften her position. Alara attended the dinner. She was perfectly gracious. She said nothing that could be used against her. She did not soften her position by the width of a hair. Prince Caspian, Marin's husband, came to Ashford Manor in November. It was a private visit, arranged discreetly, and whatever was said between him and his sister remained between them. He stayed for 2 hours. He left without any visible change in the situation. He did not return. King Aldrich made no public statement on any of it. He did not need to. His presence or absence from certain events communicated everything that needed to be communicated, and those who understood the language of royal protocol read it clearly. Alara continued her work. The Northern Territories negotiations concluded successfully in December. The land agreements were signed. The governors returned home satisfied. Caldenmore's position in the north was stronger than it had been in 15 years, and the work that had nearly been derailed on a quiet evening in October had ultimately produced exactly the outcome it was supposed to produce. No one outside a very small circle ever knew how close it had come to going wrong. That was how Alara preferred it. People who knew her well noticed something in the months that followed. Not a softening. Alara was not a woman who softened. But there was a quality of resolution that had not been there before in quite the same way. As if something that had been unfinished for a long time had finally been finished. As if she had been waiting, without fully knowing it, to prove to herself that the things she had spent her life protecting were worth protecting, and that she was willing to pay whatever price that protection required. She had paid the price. The price was a fractured household, a relationship that would not be repaired, and the knowledge that what she had done, though right, had made her life considerably more complicated. She did not appear to regret it. She did not appear to take satisfaction in it either. She simply continued, which for Alara had always been the point. The servants of Ashford Manor would say, years later, when they were old enough and far enough removed to speak freely about those days, that there was a morning in October when the whole house felt different. When the silence that fell after that letter was placed on that silver tray was not the silence of tension or of fear, but of something settling into its rightful place. They would say that they had all known, in the way that people who watch powerful individuals closely always know, that this was coming. That it had been building for a very long time. And they would say that when it finally arrived, Princess Alara had handled it exactly the way they would have expected her to, without theater, without fury, without a single unnecessary word. Just the letter, just the silence, just the certainty of a woman who had made her decision and would not be moved from it. That, in the end, was who she was, and it was more than enough.